What's going on, my fellow warriors? This is Musou Prince here with another Royal Rambling. So back in early 2019, the latest entry of the Dynasty Warriors franchise was released, Dynasty Warriors 9. And what was everyone's response to the initial launch? Yeah, not too well. And also, I kinda see where they're coming from too. However, I don't believe that the game is a hot garbage mess like most people do. In fact, I think Dynasty Warriors 9 is an okay game. Hold on, before you all get your torches and pitchforks, I think it's an okay game, not a great game. At most, I'd actually give the game a score of 7 out of 10, and if I'm being honest, Warriors games have only really been okay in the most recent years, with a couple entries maybe even impressing me enough to call them good, but never great. In fact, I think the last great Dynasty Warriors game we had was Dynasty Warriors 7, with the more intriguing way of how they told the story. Now, I'm not saying Dynasty Warriors 8 was bad in any case, but it kind of bunny hopped off of Dynasty Warriors 7's shoulders and merely just added more to what 7 was. I would say Dynasty Warriors 8 is one of those good game examples, like how I see Pirate Warriors 4 in Age of Calamity. So you're all probably wondering, what the heck is the point of this video? Well, this is technically going to be an analytical video, looking at what Dynasty Warriors 9 did right and wrong to make it an okay game, and I'm going to add on little tidbits or throw in little changes that could have gave it the jump to be a great game for the series. For this analysis, I'm going to touch upon the game in 3 parts. These parts will be the story, gameplay, and overall progression. So let's go ahead and jump right into the first part, the story. So for those of you who are familiar with Dynasty Warriors, you know that it's loosely based off of the classic novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms, which in itself is loosely based off of the actual history of the Three Kingdoms era of China. For the story, you have the choice of either playing as warriors in the kingdoms of Shu, Wei, and Wu, with a couple of key figures who are outside of these main 3, and depending on which kingdom they belong to, you play the story of that kingdom. Now, what I feel like they did right was again making the story kingdom based like what they did in 7 and 8, and I feel like they did really well in capturing most of the events that each kingdom had to go through. I am 100% confident in saying that 9's story is the most detailed we have ever gotten in terms of showing what the kingdoms had to go through, especially the economic blight that the kingdom of Shu was facing during Liu Shan's reign as a major highlight of what I liked about it. The story even allowed you to unlock characters naturally by progressing through the story of each kingdom and eventually allowed you to freely switch between them in a future update. But what the story did wrong at launch was that Koei tried to give each individual warrior their own story thread as well, and failed miserably at this due to almost every character in one kingdom sharing all of the same cutscenes with only a few rare exceptions, and I mean a rare few. And not to mention, certain characters' stories begin when they first join the kingdom and end at their last battle they fought in. This can be good for some characters like Liu Bei and Cao Cao because they're at the forefront of most of their kingdom's story. But characters like Ma Chao, Ma Dai, Peng De, and Zhang Liao's stories were all greatly or slightly reduced from what they could have been, since the aforementioned warriors all had major battles that they were a part of before they joined their respective kingdoms. But the biggest offender of this blunder was none other than my boy Zhu Shu, who only participated in, drumroll please, one battle. Only one battle, being the Battle of Xinyi. And it was this moment where I realized that more could have been done with this game's story. If Koei not only wanted a kingdom-based story, but also individual stories for their characters, here's how I would have done it, using Shu as the example. Like how Dynasty Warriors 9 did, you would only start with Liu Bei, Guan Yu, and Zhang Fei, and as you progress through the story, you would meet more characters that you can unlock naturally. But here's where I would have done things differently. For the sake of allowing individual characters to shine, certain missions in the story should only be available for certain characters. For example, during the Yellow Turban Rebellion, you could have 2 missions you have to do. One mission would be to save Cao Cao from a group of yellow turbans, but this mission can only be done if your player character is Guan Yu. The second mission is where you need to rescue a small village from a yellow turban raid, but this can only be done if your character is Liu Bei. By having missions where you have to play as a certain character, not only does it give the player a chance to play around with other characters, but it gives that sense of individualism to the characters while still being in a kingdom-based storyline. And it could also add to the player's sense of scale of having to use multiple characters to get these missions done. As for characters who have had major battles before joining their kingdoms, I have an idea to fix that as well. Allow these past major battles to be unlockable additional scenarios through interacting with the characters who participated in said battles. So here's this for the example. After occupying Chengdu and unlocking Ma Chao and Ma Dai, you could go to Chengdu and talk to either one of those two. If you do, you could be given a prompt like, "Hey, I heard you guys fought Cao Cao at Tong Gate," and by doing this, you could unlock the additional scenario where you can play as Ma Chao and Ma Dai during the Battle of Tong Gate. For the case of Zhu Shu's one battle though, it's a simple but albeit controversial fix as well. Because of the fact that most of his battles were underway, he really should have been a Wei officer in this game instead of in Shu. That may piss off initial fans of Zhu Shu, but that would have made his DLC story so much more satisfying and hyped when that was finally released. And speaking of which, DLC stories. I've only played through a handful of these, but out of the ones I have, the DLC stories are amazing. But, like the original story, could have been done better. The main issue with the DLC stories is that they are really driven by the actions of a single character, which was good, but also bad. The bad was the fact that you can't switch to any other character in the DLC story outside of free mode, aside from the single character that the story was for, which sucked because during Fa Zhang's scenario, I wanted to switch to Zhang Fei during the Battle of Fan Castle and use him to rescue Guan Yu, because that felt more moving and story-driven than using Fa Zhang. So instead of these DLC stories being driven by the actions of a single character, they should have just been overall what-if scenarios, focusing on a handful of characters from the kingdom the DLC story is based on. Sticking with using Shu as the example, instead of the Zhu Shu DLC story we got, they could have named it What If Liu Bei, the King of Jing, and used a bunch of similar key points that were used in Zhu Shu's story for this reimagined scenario. Liu Bei has finally gained the services of Zhuge Liang thanks to Zhu Shu being a mediary, but for Zhuge Liang's plan to split the kingdom in three, he has a different way to achieve this than what history has known, using the land of Jing as the stepping point instead of Yi. However, he'll need the help of his old classmates Zhu Shu and Pang Tong to pull this off. And like that, Zhu Shu and Pang Tong's stories have been extended from their original shorter points by including them into one of the longer what-if scenarios, while also allowing the player to play as whoever is involved in the story. The DLC stories will also include the previous points I mentioned about certain missions only being accessible by certain characters, which could have allowed more creativity in what kind of missions should have been made and who could have accomplished them. Okay, this section is going to be a long one with what I have to talk about, so I'm going to go ahead and put a list here of everything I'm going to discuss in this segment, for not only your attention's sake, but also for the sake of my organizing. So first off, I'm going to talk about the combat, and I may be in the minority for this, but I like the state combo system. It was an interesting take for a new way to do combat, especially more so than 6's Renbu system. However, I do agree with people that say the combat was not diverse enough, so how would I fix this? Bring back some actual good mechanics that were ironically removed from previous Dynasty Warriors games. I would have added a grabbing mechanic like what was used in Dynasty Warriors 6 to add an alternate way for block breaking, replace the current counter system in Dynasty Warriors 9 with the one from Dynasty Warriors 4, requiring more precise timing, and utilize sprint attacks. Seriously, there's a stamina bar now. Why the heck wasn't sprint attacks used in congruence with the use of stamina? That, alongside with air dashing and rolling, would have given so much more dynamics in managing stamina. For sieges, I would have allowed a more hands-on experience instead of just the archers mechanic that I feel like they lazily added in. With engineer units being a thing, why not have the character interact with the engineer and allow the player to choose what's being built from catapults, siege towers, rams, and ballista, and to top it all off, allow these weapons to only be built if your character has the resources for it, rewarding the player with powerful and useful siege weapons for being prepared. And for that grappling hook, I would nerf the heck out of that and make it a one-time use item that you need to craft. Next up, the AI, and in parallel, the difficulty. Now, I miss the old days of Dynasty Warriors where the enemy soldiers used to give a challenge, but with the amount of enemy soldiers displayed in current games, I don't blame the developers for making these soldiers mainly idle punching bags who throw such weak-ass hits that even make Hercule go, "That's pathetic." However, that should not have seeped over to NPC and playable character enemies, where the real challenges should be in these modern games. And for Dynasty Warriors 9, it was abysmal for both how the AI acts and what was done to increase the difficulty of these AIs. So what was affected by increasing the difficulty? The numbers of the enemy's stats. That's it. I hate it when games do this. Not to mention, Dynasty Warriors 9 already has a level-based system. They already have a built-in increase for stats depending on the levels of the enemies. So here's the solution. When initially selecting difficulties in Dynasty Warriors 9, I would make it so that the higher the difficulty, the higher the base level of enemy should be. For easy, I would make it so that the level rise of enemies would be inconsequential at level 1, making them easy to dispatch for new players and having the late game level cap of enemies be around level 30. For normal, this would have the most natural progression of enemy leveling from level 1, but still not too difficult, having the late game level cap of enemies be around level 50, similar to how Kingdom Hearts does it with level 45 for being their end game. For hard, this is where level increments would be a bit more advanced for those who are starting out, where instead of enemies beginning at level 1, they'd be at like say level 10 or 15, but the late game level cap would not yet reach the maximum level of being only a level 75. And finally, the game's staple chaos difficulty, where this would test the player's skills, having the enemy start at level 25, but end with a late game level cap of maximum level 100. And I'm not done with just level increments. I would also make it so that the higher the level, the more chance NPC and playable officers are able to counter your abilities, like dodging away from your guard breaking attacks, or even grabbing you out of your own guard, and are more often to perform powerful attacks like their unique abilities from the state combos and their Musou attacks. Bada bing, bada boom. You got yourself a challenge increase not only from the number standpoint in a real way, but also in the AI department. And just a little add-on, players should have the choice of whether to start their characters' levels over from scratch for the higher difficulties, or can do a new game plus to tackle these higher difficulties with an advantage. Moving on to the missions. God, these were such a hit and miss concept in the game, and only recently before deciding to write the script for this video did I understand how the missions could have been utilized perfectly. And funny enough, it was in a way that missions were already being utilized for some aspects in the game, by talking to NPC or PC characters. I don't know why, but I found that almost every mission you had to activate by speaking to someone has always been better paced than other missions you activate by just entering into a specified area. If all missions were activated by speaking to a character, the pacing of battles could have been implemented so much easier by allowing both the main mission as well as the side missions to be executed. But I won't stop there. Let me use the Battle of Cherbi from the perspective of the Sun Liu Alliance as an example, since to me, it was the most horribly paced and implemented battle in either kingdom's storylines. So the setup is simple. The Sun Liu Alliance's base camp and areas of influence would be fittingly at Cherbi, whereas the Wei base camp and areas of influence would be fittingly from Wulin, across the river from Cherbi. Now, within the area of Cherbi, there will be many officers you can talk to, each containing a side mission, like helping Huang Gai procure supplies for the fire attack, or helping Zhuge Liang secure the area around his altar. But there will be one particular person you need to talk to, in this case Zhou Yu, to activate the battle's main mission, and by activating this mission, the entire battle would be loaded and played out like that of a classic Dynasty Warriors battle, where every ally and enemy has a programmed path they'll take, but by completing the side missions requested by some of the NPCs and PCs beforehand, this will allow certain events to happen or not happen during the main battle. By helping Huang Gai, you can allow the fire attack to do more damage to enemy ships, and by helping Zhuge Liang secure the altar, you can prevent a scripted ambush by Jia Shu from happening against the altar. This is the perfect way of how to encapsulate the grand battles of Dynasty Warriors into an open world RPG-like setting, while also giving the player incentive to complete these missions in a well-paced manner. Now, onto the free roaming. In my opinion, the most difficult part I had in trying to make more interesting, but I think I got it. So in Dynasty Warriors 9, the free roaming is kind of bare bones. You pretty much travel from point A to point B without really anything interesting happening, except maybe some enemy controlled camps that could be in the way of point B. But that's it. I really don't blame people who would rather fast travel to point B instead of just taking the scenic route, but some ways I feel can entice more people to not use the fast travel would be the following. First, on-the-road NPCs. This could be from neutral NPC travelers to enemy patrol units to even a key ally that you can find with an on-hand mission, bringing me to the next point, travel events. These could either be activated by random, like you're suddenly attacked by a scourge of bandits, or a group of merchants are under attack by wild animals. Or, these could be activated by talking to a passing NPC, maybe even a key figure in the kingdom's story, like Zhang Fei, who's requesting help in raiding an enemy's wine supply, or Zhang Liao asking for help in taking down a nearby bandit camp. All of these added in while also tweaking the already existing free roam features like iconic monuments or hideouts would make the open world feel more alive instead of just randomly generated enemies mindlessly wandering away from the paths of travel. And for those who wish to travel into enemy-controlled territory, each province should have its own base level of enemies you encounter. Like if you're someone in Shu, Jing and Hongzhong would have the base level of whatever you're currently at for the difficulty, but going to somewhere like Zhuchang or Jiapi, deeper into the Wei territory, could have the enemy level scaled up exponentially, in case players want to challenge themselves in these higher leveled areas or grind for more experience within the base areas. Better yet, why not implement raid bosses? No, those sucked! I mean real raid battles! In certain scenarios while in free roam, you could come across a powerful enemy officer while traversing in one of the higher leveled areas, like say Zhongliao while you're messing around in Wei-controlled Hefei. These guys would be tough as nails and difficult to catch off guard, but by defeating them, you could gain rare materials that could help in crafting powerful gear and maybe even your character's ultimate weapons, giving more incentive for players to travel all around the map and in different enemy-controlled areas. But that's traveling. What about other free roam aspects? In come the hobbies. What do I mean by hobbies? Fishing, hunting, crafting, you know, all the side stuff that sucked in Dynasty Warriors 9. Guys, even I have to admit, I freaking hate how mishandled hunting and fishing were. So how would I fix these? Make them into fun mini-games that other games were able to pull off. I would do the fishing along the lines of how fishing was done in Genshin Impact or Final Fantasy 15, and I would have the hunting be an almost Unreal-like depending on whether you're bow hunting or trapping. So there, quick and simple. But I would also add in some other aspects too to make things more lively. Maybe a bounty system could have been used that you can accept tasks in order to go after deadly enemies or capture key outposts for great rewards. This would be great to list the location of the raid bosses I brought up earlier, and then I would completely revamp the buddy system that was already made in Dynasty Warriors 9. In the game, the only characters that appear in cities and towns are characters that are not relevant to the current chapter you're in. Even if you're in Chengdu where you should see every Shu officer around, you'll still only see Zuotzi walking around the streets. And the only way to increase your friendship with relevant officers is to invite them to hideouts. Starting from scratch, I would first only allow the ability to invite people to hideouts if your friendship is high enough. But the only way to do that is find them in the cities controlled by the kingdom you work for, probably have them appear based on a time schedule. But once you can invite friends to hideouts, you could do more things to easily increase your friendship, like giving gifts or asking them to come along with you in free roam, which would end immediately if you take on either a side or main mission. And to make this buddy system even more worthwhile, have special events play out for certain character combinations like what was done in Samurai Warriors 5. It would make the player care about the characters more and feel like they actually worked hard on budding these friendships instead of rinse and repeating the hideout invite process. Whew! And that was all I had to say about gameplay. Told you that was going to be a long one. Last but certainly not least, the feel of progression in the game. In terms of story progression, I've already talked about how the game allowed you to naturally unlock characters by playing through the story. That's fine, nothing else to say. Progressing through gear and weapons by crafting them is also a simple and easy to implement function that I felt Dynasty Warriors 9 get good as well. I even commented earlier about how raid bosses dropping rare materials can make crafting more interesting. So the last thing I can think of that I feel could have still used some tweaking to make the progression system even better is the stat upgrades and weapons. I want to first talk about the weapon gems. How could you mess this up, Koei? You've done similar weapon upgrade systems like this in previous games. Heck, you already have a built-in stat mod system in Dynasty Warriors 9 for crafted gear. Why would you ever think it was a good idea to make these weapon gems drop with stats based on an RNG system? Not only is that annoying as heck to get the right gem with the right stats you want, but it also takes away player creativity with their weapon builds. This fix is simple. Just like they do with the stat mods for your equipment, these weapon gems should also be crafted only at blacksmiths and allow players to choose whatever stat mods they want if they have the necessary materials. There! Done! Simple! Ah! Now, to the less annoying part, the stat upgrades. These were also fine and well implemented, but could have been perfect for one change and one add-on I had in mind. The change, getting rid of the max limit of Book of Musou you can use on a character. For those who don't know, there is an item called Book of Musou that allows you to use them in order to allocate points for stat upgrades without leveling up characters. When I found out about these, I immediately tried to use them to max out all of the stats of Jushu, but then it hit me. you can only use a maximum of 99 books of Musou per character, which was nowhere near enough to max out 2 stats fully, let alone all stats. That was a dumb limitation, and if I had the power, I would have gotten rid of it, because the beauty of most Dynasty Warriors games was being able to fully max out your favorite character's stats. And the thing I would add on in addition to the stat upgrades is a skill tree for skill stats like increased flinch power or increased drop rates that would make sense for certain characters and to give even more depth and difference between said characters. Whew! That was a long-winded ride, but that's it! That is what I would do in order to make Dynasty Warriors 9 the okay game it is now into a game that could have been great and well received by the fans for something that kept the spirit of the old games but tried something new and succeeded. So I do hope you enjoyed this roller coaster through my game developer mind. Or maybe I probably pissed you off into knowing that this game could have been done much better. Either way, you're welcome. I'll be seeing you all in whatever my next project would be. So until then, later guys!